Hi, I'm donalee Moulton. I'm a writer based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I get to talk to you today about writing a synopsis. I don't think you can see this, but behind me, out my window, there are high winds and lots of rain. It's storming here in Halifax, and I think it's a perfect backdrop because for many of us, that's what writing a synopsis feels like, hitting right into the storm. My background is in freelance journalism and nonfiction, and I have two and soon three nonfiction books. But in the last couple of years, I've waded into the fiction arena, and I now have two mystery novels out. My first one, Hung Out to Die, is a traditional mystery, all my imagination and all my ideas. The second one is a historical mystery, and it is based in 1734. And so it required a lot of research in order to make sure that the book was historically accurate. And both of the books required a synopsis, something that was new to me as a nonfiction writer and new to me as a freelance journalist. So today we're going to talk about what to do to write a successful synopsis. And you're going to find there is a strong foundation for writing a synopsis. There is also a strong tradition of taking a chance and hitting out on your own into the murky waters of a synopsis. So I've got some slides. We're going to bring them up and we'll go through them. My hope is that we will get through most of them. If not, I can provide any additional information following the presentation. So let's take a little look at this thing called a synopsis. And there's going to be lots of definitions and lots of descriptions. As I said, there is a thread that unites all of those, though. And the first thread is that it is shorter rather than longer. Many sites, many experts, many agents like the 500 to 1,000 word summary. And that's what it is. It says, if you read this book, this is what you're going to read about. And a synopsis is not optional anymore. It is part of a submission package that we send as writers to prospective agents and publishers. And so they have an expectation as to what that synopsis should look like and what should be in it. And we're going to talk about those ingredients. The purpose of the synopsis is to let the agent or the publisher know what happens in the book. It's not a pitch. It's not a query. It's not a blurb. It is not an opportunity to sell yourself with dramatic language or clever language or intriguing language, although those elements can be part of your description. Again, the narrative arc. This is about saying to prospective publishers and agents, the story starts here, moves to this, concludes here. And as you will discover, the synopsis is a spoiler. Everything that happens that's critical to your book will be in your synopsis. A lot of us as writers want to hold that back. But for many agents and publishers, they're only reading sample pages. And so they need to understand what happens in this book. It follows what we like to call the structure of the novel, not necessarily the chronology of your novel or your piece of writing. And we will talk about what we mean by that. So let's take a little closer look at this thing called a synopsis. All right. As I said a minute ago, this is part of the package. At one time, my understanding is it was optional, it was evolving. Now it is a standard ingredient, and it will be required by many publishers and agents. They will specify what they want in the synopsis, in the length of the synopsis. So it's good now to be thinking about how would you take your book and bring it down to a page or two. So from an agent and publisher's point of view, there's a cover letter, and that often gets read first. Many of them will then dive into your sample pages, And then they will turn to the synopsis to say, you know what? I like what I'm seeing so far. Let's find out what happens in this book. So the purpose of the synopsis is to say, this is the plot. This is the action that occurs. This is the character development that occurs. This is what holds the book together at its core. So it's not every subplot. It's not every action that takes place. It's the heart of the book. It's also the heart of the characters in the book. So we want to know who are the main characters. We don't want to know every character in the book. We don't even want to know important sub-characters unless they are critical to your plot description, right? It helps your agent and your publisher to understand, okay, now I see how we can sell this. I understand what the hook is that will draw readers in. I understand what the premise is that will make this book something people want to read. And I understand how I could begin to pitch this as a book that should be read. It also explains why the book will appeal to readers. You're not going to state that. You're not going to say this book will appeal to readers because, but the description of the characters and of the plot will highlight the appeal. Sounds simple, doesn't it? It's not. It's a pain. It's a necessary pain. And it's actually a very good exercise for writers to go through because it forces us to think, I can't repeat the 240 or 340 pages in my book. I have to boil it down to its essence. What does that summary look like? And so here is what we won't be able to do today. That's a magic bullet. And wouldn't that be lovely if we could all have a magic bullet? If we could say, this is the template you should always use for a synopsis. This is how you should always start a synopsis. This is how you should always end a synopsis. There's no such thing, unfortunately. And I learned that in some ways, the easy way and the hard way. When I started pitching my first book, Hung Out to Die, and agents and publishers were asking for this thing called a synopsis, I started to look up what is a synopsis. And I thought, well, I can do this. My background in freelance journalism is taking large documents and reports and long interviews and paring them down to their essence. And what I discovered was that there was a format or structure or approach to the synopsis that many publishers and agents like. And if you don't give them that, they're uncomfortable. They're not quite sure that this is going to work, whereas others embrace that difference. So I entered my unpublished first novel into a competition, and in one of the judge's comments, the judge said, "Oh my God, this synopsis sucks. Like it doesn't follow any of the rules. There isn't a publisher or an agent that's going to look at this." And I thought, really? I didn't realize that the structure was that kind of formulated. So I thought, but still, I write nonfiction. I understand how to explain and describe things and take length and to pare it down. So I entered my synopsis in a competition. There is an organization that launched the synopsis competition. I entered the inaugural synopsis competition. And lovely enough, I won and was told by the judge that great synopsis draws us into the book and the characters, makes us want to read more. So it made me realize that there isn't a silver bullet. There isn't also a rigid set of guidelines that you have to adhere to. But when you step outside the recommended guidelines, you do so at your own risk. So here are some of the recommended guidelines around writing a synopsis. So length. It's usually about 500 to 1,000 words. So it's usually page, couple of pages, and this length will often be specified by the agent or the publisher. They will say, I want a 500-word synopsis, or I want a 3-paragraph synopsis, or I want a synopsis that is no longer than 2 pages. And so you want to respect any guidelines that are specified like that. The language is, again, professional, businesslike, clear, and succinct. It is not a sales pitch, so it doesn't have the building of the drama, of the climax, of the excitement. You want to get across that the book will be exciting, and here's why. But this piece of writing in and of itself is not intended to do that. Almost without exception, your synopsis is going to be written in the third person and the present tense. And it's going to be formatted just as you would expect, right? That it's going to have double spacing or 1.5 spacing. There is some debate and discussion around that. They don't want any fancy fonts. They want to be able to pick it up, read it, and move through it very quickly. And at the end, they want to say, I understand what happens in this book. I like it, right? Pay attention to that last item. This is one of the complaints that comes up fairly frequently from agents and publishers, is they can't figure out what this file is about because it's called something like There's a Storm in Atlantic Canada. Yay. And they don't know what that means. They really want this to be as professional, simple, and straightforward as possible. Hung out to die, dash, synopsis. Nice and simple. So as soon as they see synopsis, they know what they're going to be reading. And as soon as they see the title, they can then align it with your query letter, with your cover letter, and with other things. Character names, it's recommended that you, again, don't put in every character that makes an appearance in the book, but that you introduce the characters so that it's easier for your agent, for the agent that's reading this or the publisher that's reading this, to keep track of who's who and to have them introduced in a way that stands out. So the recommendation is bold the names or uppercase the names. And then the character thumbnails. This is about not over informing your reader. We need to know information about the characters, but we don't want their backstory. So here's a question. How would you describe James Bond in a character thumbnail? And here's one example. Here's his name. Here's his agent. Here's what he does. And here's a few of his characteristics. And that's all the reader of the synopsis needs to understand how you are positioning this character in the book. They'll get more when they actually read the book, but this gives them what they need to understand the lay of the landscape, right? Now, here is an option you might want to consider. So if you have a tagline, a pitch line that you think is fun or intriguing or interesting and really helps to show your skill as a writer and make the book appealing, you can include that in your synopsis. And you might want to make sure that it is very brief, position it at the front, at the very top of your synopsis in italics or something, as a way to draw them in to the main heart of the synopsis, which will be the summary that they're looking for. So in my new book, Bind, it brings together 3 women who meet in a yoga studio and they go on to solve crime. And my little line at the top of my synopsis says, everything that happens in a yoga studio is not Zen. So it doesn't take up a lot of space, doesn't overdo it on the selling, but says, maybe I'll get a smile out of my reader. And that's a good thing. All right. So, how to write the synopsis itself. There is a tendency to take the entirety of your book and pare it down. So it starts here in 1734. There is a fire. The fire is put out. Someone is arrested. The recommendation is not to do that for the synopsis, but rather to build from the structure of the book. And by structure of the book, we mean when the book opens, when life starts, what is the status quo? Then something obviously disrupts the status quo because that is your book. That is what you're talking about. So tell us about that inciting incident and some of the action or developments that fall from that. There is a crisis, or there is a climax, or there is a pinnacle at which everything comes to a head. What is that? And then how is it resolved? So in the case of mysteries, your synopsis will tell who is the criminal, who has committed the crime, why have they committed the crime, how are they finally caught, assuming they are caught, and what happens to them once they're caught, if that in fact is part of your book. There's another thing to consider when you're writing your synopsis, and that is to tell what happens in the book without referring back to the book. So the next 3 chapters in the book discuss this, or the next chapter in the book does this, or then the book moves on to, right? They're not looking for that. Simply move along, and they will know that it is what happens in the book. So the key always is not to get mired in detail. And that is a hard thing for writers to do because we know the characters so well, we know the plot so well, and we love the nuances. And we believe, I think correctly, that you don't get the full picture, the full impact, if we pare it down to that James Bond is 38, a British spy who likes martinis. It's more than that. That's the book. It's not the synopsis. So the detail comes out in the writing of the novel itself. It doesn't come out in the synopsis. That's just going to add length, and it's going to add a level of complexity for your reader, because remember, your reader isn't as familiar with the book as you are. All right. So we want the synopsis to get to the point and quickly. So here's an example for you. At work, Elizabeth searches for Peter all over the office and finally finds him in the supply room, where she tells him she resents the remarks he made about her in the staff meeting. You can start to get a sense of the tension. You can start to get a sense of her anger. This is a synopsis. At work, Elizabeth confronts Peter about his remarks at the staff meeting. The agent or the publisher will be able to fill in that this is a tense moment, that one of them is angry, that one of them may be defensive. So again, it's not about us giving all of the detail. It's giving the summary. Okay. Now, we do want to understand a little bit about the characters, obviously, and we want to know how they are affected by what goes on around them. That's the emotional appeal of your writing, and some of that needs to be in the synopsis. So generally, it's assumed that 60%, the majority of your synopsis, is about plot. What happens? Why does it happen? When does it happen? Who does it happen to? But 40% is helping us to like the characters, or to get to know the characters, or to understand the world in which those characters operate. We'll give you a little example of that. So we're not going to read this, but this is a storyline about Twilight, and it will be hard in this world not to have heard about Twilight. It's a romance. It's an epic romance, and it involves vampires and other creatures and a love triangle, and it's wonderful and fabulous, and it's in print, and it's been in movies, and It can be summarized, as you see, quite succinctly. But here's something that came out of Wikipedia. So this is an opening to a possible synopsis, and it has no character, emotion, or language. It is just the facts. It's that rational appeal we just talked about. As Bella walks into the class, a fan blows her scent towards a boy named Edward Cullen. Bella sits next to Edward in biology class on her first day of school. He disappears for a few days, but sees more of Bella upon his return. Bella is then nearly struck by a van in the school parking lot. Edward saves Bella, stopping the van with only his hand. So that's a basic, straightforward, no oomph to it. Effective, but you could add a little something like this. As Bella walks into the class, a fan blows her scent towards a mysterious boy named Edward Cullen. Bella sits next to Edward in biology class on her first day of school, but he seems repulsed by her, affecting her feelings in the process. He disappears for a few days, but warms up to Bella upon his return. Their newfound relationship is interrupted after Bella is nearly struck by a van in the school parking lot. Edward saves Bella, stopping the van with only his hand. You can see the subtle differences, but important differences. Words like repulsed, mysterious, add an element to the writing without adding a lot of length or detail to the writing. So take a look at doing that in your synopsis and see if it will work easily. Okay. So this is a synopsis. And we won't go through it all, but this is a winning synopsis in that contest that I referenced earlier. And as you can see, the judge said that the synopsis hooked me immediately, not only with the excellent voice, but also with the unusual premise of the novel. So it's not just that the synopsis has to be good, but that the agent and publisher also has to want to read the book. And sometimes when I'm going to publisher websites or agent websites, I see little statements like, please, no more vampire stories, or please, no more pandemic poems. So there is a saturation point for some topics, for some agents and publishers, that even if the writing and the novel is fabulous, it's the topic that they don't particularly like. So let's take a look at this synopsis. Ajax and Athena Frost haven't had the most normal childhood. While other kids study math and spelling, they instead learned how to distract the hellhound of the underworld by tossing 3 sticks, 1 for each of his kids. Their parents, Cornelius and Hildy Frost, raised them to assume the family legacy of protecting Earth from the villains who seek to destroy it. Everyone thinks they're nuts. Nobody talks to them, and they have no friends. So you can hear the voice resonating through this. The first paragraph gives us this wonderful summary of the world in which we will be entering when we read this book. The second paragraph gives us the sense of fun and play and sarcasm that may filter through the book. And it's going to get even better. It then goes on to say, one day they receive news that their grandfather has died. So this is the inciting incident. Cornelius and Hildy immediately move their family across the country to live in his decrepit old house. Athena and Ajax will go to school for the first time. They might even make a friend. It doesn't go well. While Cornelius and Hildy disappear into the hall bathroom wearing battle armor, Athena fights with her science teacher about dragons imprisoned inside volcanoes. The other kids avoid them, and their parents don't return. And now there's a horse in the bathroom. So you can see instantly that we're intrigued by this. And we can see that if the book follows this kind of plot summary and writing, readers will be going, oh my God, a horse? I'm assuming that says horse. I have a little bar right above that. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but it goes on to talk about what they learn as they too join in the fight in the underworld. It also, as you will see in the very last paragraph, it goes on to talk about how the characters change as a result of the experiences that they have. And if character change and growth and development is a central part of your writing, then you want to be sure to include that in your synopsis as well. But we're probably talking 10 paragraphs in total here. So it's not long for a book that probably is. Right? I'm going to skip over these just to talk about some of the common mistakes that we are said to make when we're writing the synopsis. First is word count. If they tell you they want a brief summary, they mean brief. If they tell you it's 1,000 words, they want 1,000 words. What that means from your perspective is you may need more than one synopsis. The longer synopsis will give you an opportunity to have more character development, to have more of that emotional appeal in there. So it's a good idea to have word counts, 500, 1,000, 1 page, 2 page, 3 pages. We've talked about the detail already. We don't want a lot of detail about setting. And here is an example of a Jane Austen novel. The novel is set in a small village in Regency, England. We don't talk about who lives in the village. We don't talk about the types of trees in the village. We don't talk about Main Street in the village. It's there in one simple sentence. Likewise, James Bond and character development. We need to be very scrupulous about detail in the plot, as well as the characters and the setting. Subplots, it will be assumed, are there. And it's okay to ignore some of those because you are being restricted by length. The other thing, though, that you're not going to hide is the plot twist, right? You can say spoiler alert, but you will very definitely be telling them what happens and what the outcome is. And again, this idea that we tell you how the book unfolds by telling you what happens in the book. So we don't say, then the novel picks up the story of Kate and Jacob. We actually go to Kate and Jacob. Meanwhile, Kate and Jacob. Sections are usually a no-no in a synopsis. It is usually a continuous flow of information, as a summary usually is. Characters will be introduced because their names will be in bold or uppercase. We will see that this is new. And at times, if you're switching dates, you might want to locate us. So Paris, 1983, this is what happens. Paris, 1993, this is what happens. And again, we're trying to avoid story construction. In the climax of the novel, in a series of scenes, in a number of subplots, agents and publishers are interested in that in the synopsis. They will assume that it's there, and they will definitely see it when they read the book. So our last mistakes to think about, to avoid the character backstory. We want a simple summary, a phrase or two. Dialogue is not usually included unless for some reason it is central to the story, or it is important to the plot. All right. And again, we're not asking questions because we're not trying to draw the reader in. We're simply telling them what happened. And I'm going to stop here and invite you to ask any questions that you would like about writing a synopsis. I will be glad to answer them in the chat. You can also visit me at donaleemoulton.com. And there's a form there that you can send me all the questions you'd like, and I will answer everything that I can. The bottom line, I think, is that there is a structure, there is an expected structure to a synopsis. That structure is a summary that outlines plot and that introduces characters. That expected structure is probably a good thing to adhere to, but you don't have to adhere to it rigidly. I know I didn't with my first book, and my publisher, when she offered me a contract or when she asked for the full manuscript, she actually said, "We enjoyed the synopsis so much, we want to read the book." So take a risk, but be aware that that's exactly what you're doing, is taking a risk. I've enjoyed talking with you and looking forward to your questions. Good luck with your writing.